Thank you very much. Good morning. It's amazing to be here, and welcome back to this incredible Porter Tun room here at the brewery. You're sitting in the largest surviving building from the 18th century brewery, completed by Samuel Whitbread in 1784. Originally used for the fermentation of the malt liquor porter, I doubt when they constructed this room nearly 250 years ago, they could have considered that we would all be here today, a bunch of software developers learning about this thing called PHP. Yet, here we all are. And it's not just this room, but London itself has certainly changed over the years. Actually, incredibly so, just within our own lifetimes. This is a photo that I took on a school geography field trip back in the late 90s. If you've ever been on a school geography field trip in the UK, then you'll know the scene. There's rain in the air, clipboard in hand with soggy paper attached, usually some sort of questionnaire that needs to be completed by the end of the day. This particular field trip was not much different. I believe this photo was taken somewhere in the Mudchute Farm area as we explored London's docklands as part of studying its regeneration plans. And despite many a rain-affected, cloudy field trip, I enjoyed geography through school, and that's what led me to take it on at degree level. And somehow, between then and now, I've ended up here. So, after graduating with a degree in geography in 2004, I then spent a couple of years working in an admin role for the local council, wondering what on earth I wanted to do with my life. And it was during this time that I discovered PHP. I taught myself by building a Formula One Fantasy League website. I caught the programming bug, and this led in 2007 to me starting my first web development role, working with PHP. And the rest, well, most of the more recent stuff at least, is in the Git history. So there I was, working away on PHP applications, forgetting all about geography. Until one day, about 5 years ago, I saw a quote from computer programmer Ellen Ullman on Twitter, and suddenly I made a connection between my degree and my now profession that I never had before. We build our computer systems the way we build our cities. Over time, without a plan, on top of ruins. This quote spoke to me, both as a geographer and as a software engineer. My two worlds colliding. Here was someone making a direct comparison between the built environment we're all inhabiting and the virtual environments we're all creating. And I think this picture does a really good job of representing it. Just over a year ago, archaeologists uncovered the largest Roman mosaic to be found in London in 50 years. In the foreground, Roman mosaic created approximately 1700 years ago. And in the background, the Shard, one of London's most modern buildings. Over time? Yeah. Without a plan? Well, the Romans couldn't really have planned for our present day. More likely, they would have had their own plans at the time they were creating this mosaic, and subsequent eras their own plans, and so on as times evolved. On top of ruins? Yeah, but in reaction to human evolution and progress. I wonder how many of you have ever felt like you've played the role of code archaeologist. Perhaps this picture rings true for some code bases you may have worked on. However, there's 1700 years between Roman mosaic and the Shard. And I'll hazard a guess that you may feel you've seen this type of transition in a code base within just a few short years. Perhaps due to speedy business growth or pivoting causing changing requirements and use cases, and resulting in the evolution of the code base. More than likely backed up by wider technological evolution and progress. So, I do think that Ellen Ullman was onto something when comparing the evolution of cities with the evolution of computer systems. albeit on some sort of condensed timescales in our virtual worlds. And this led me to wonder what other evidence of such similarities exists. One of the outcomes of a constantly evolving, never-finished city is that over time it can become an interesting patchwork of differing architectural styles. London is an amazing example of this. One minute you can be looking at Georgian architecture, the next modern glass-fronted skyscrapers, the next the brutalist concrete of the 1970s. And so it is in our virtual worlds that many different approaches and frameworks have been in and out of fashion over the years. Or months. I'm looking at you, JavaScript. And over time, a codebase can come to reflect this. And whilst an eclectic mix of building styles may contribute positively to a city, within a codebase this can actually be less favourable, because it adds to the cognitive load required to read and understand what's going on. I'll bet that most towns and cities of any great age will have somewhere close to their heart an old town. This is where the oldest buildings survive, perhaps today with preservation orders preventing their removal or significant modification. And today may be surviving on income generated from tourism rather than the local populations that they once served. I say close to a city's heart because oftentimes you'll find that the location of the modern day city centre has shifted to a nearby location where new developments such as shopping centres and entertainment facilities have been constructed on areas of land with fewer building constraints. The old town still exists, however, and must be maintained to ensure the continued success of the city. And so it is in our code bases that there will also often exist an old town. Or perhaps in our world, we'd do better to call it the legacy town. Somewhere close to the heart of our application is the code that contractor wrote on day one, still driving some core aspect of functionality, and today a creaking foundation on the critical business path that few people know the exact specifics of to be brave enough to make changes to. So it kind of takes on its own self-imposed preservation order. Around it, perhaps a secondary centre has sprung up, hosting the core of more recent functionality that bypasses the legacy town. Not all developments within a city will live forever. By its very nature, the evolution of a city will naturally involve, over time, the decline of some facilities. If buildings are left uncared for and abandoned, such decline can cause seriously negative effects on a city, including vandalism, crime, and general decrease in quality of life. If areas are left uncared for, however, the likelihood is that they will get worse. Other areas will also decline, or other facilities will also decline because no one wants to go to the area anymore, and the area will grow a negative reputation. Industrial decline in London's Docklands was what led to that field trip that I was on investigating the regeneration plans back in the 90s. In a code base, we call this dead code. Code for a feature that is not used anymore. Or maybe code for a feature we don't think is used anymore, causing confusion, red herrings, and making it harder to onboard new team members. In much the same way as an abandoned building, there will be a financial cost to removing the dead code. And this work will often take a lower priority when compared with other new features being requested by the business. Dead code is technical debt, however, and will likely ultimately catch up with us. As the number of people living in a city grows, so too does the need to house and support this expanding population. The growth of city suburbs, often with low-density housing and major reliance on the car, has led to the rapid and often unsustainable expansion of cities around the world, described by the term urban sprawl. Megacities are the result. Indeed, by some definitions, you're all sitting in a megacity right now. in the world of geography, studies are now looking at what various cities are doing with regard to spatial restructuring of a megacity. For example, creating more localized centres within the wider city region. The application equivalent of a megacity? Well, that has to be the monolith, right? Spatial restructuring? Think modularizing the monolith or microservices. And of course, if the urban sprawl of the monolith gets too much, then there may be a cry for the big rewrite, the chance to start again fresh and to do things right this time. If you live in one of these towns or cities, then you live in part of the biggest urban rewrite project in British history. Mid-20th century Britain's vision of utopia. In post-war London, there was not enough housing to support the growing population. They hadn't built any new houses in 6 years. The average age of marriage was decreasing, meaning more households and a higher birth rate. And there was also some pretty significant war damage. In response to this, the government launched an ambitious scheme. New towns would be developed. An experiment in urbanism using experimental design approaches. Initially mainly on sites surrounding London, but a few a bit further afield. The first new town, Stevenage, was built in 1946, which means today is approaching 80 years old. In 2021, the Town and Country Planning Association published a report into the future of these new towns. Summarising that, today, the new towns exhibit a range of successes and failures, including as they do both the fastest growing, most successful places, yet also some of the most deprived communities in the UK. And most assessments are similar to this. Although they may have provided a utopian, dreamlike environment for their initial inhabitants, today these towns are not new anymore and exhibit just as many challenges as other towns and cities. So, despite some successes, it turns out that the big rewrite wasn't quite ultimately as utopian as initially envisaged. So, whether it's the design styles, the legacy old town, the dead code of abandoned buildings, the urban sprawl of the monolith, or the utopian rewrite, it really does appear that, in some ways at least, you can compare the evolution of cities with the evolution of computer systems. And this led me to wonder, what insight might we gain from the world of geography? Within geography, cities are studied under the subdiscipline of urban geography. Within this, there are two approaches to study. The first is the study of systems of cities. Here, the focus is on the distribution of and interactions between cities. The second approach is the study of the city as a system. Here, the focus is on the internal structures within cities. And it's this second approach that I'm going to focus on. I'm going to start by talking about two key components of a city. The first is people. People are pretty important. Without them, cities would literally not exist. It's people who are ultimately responsible for the way that places develop. Be that through the planning laws they write, or don't write, the buildings they architect, or the societies and communities they grow. But of course, this development is also impacted by a number of constraints, including environmental, financial, and political. Because of this, cities will never be perfect, and their development is likely to be driven by levels of compromise. Sound familiar? The city itself then becomes the entity, and the second key component, the environment, with which its population interacts. And of course, every person will have their own perspectives, their own perceptions, and generate their own unique and individual sense of place. When I was studying urban geography at university, the main course textbook was written by a guy called Michael Paccioni. And in it, he says that understanding the nature of the person-environment relationship is a quintessential geographical problem. Studies by urban geographers are important because of geography's concern with space. We like to map things. At a city level, research can be useful for identifying, for example, areas of deprivation within a city. That could do with some further insight. But it's at neighbourhood level where research can really start to make a difference by contributing to policies to help improve the quality of life for the people living in these areas. Quality of life is a hugely subjective term. There is no one definition nor definitive list of attributes that may contribute to it. However, Paccioni argues that there are two fundamental factors that contribute to quality of life within a city: urban environmental quality and urban livability. In other words, what's there, the environment, and how we, the people, interact with and feel about it. Urban environmental quality is derived from objective indicators, statistical data such as employment rates, crime incidences, and the number of education and sports facilities. It's an absolute term, an attribute of the environment, based on the physical attributes of a city, what Paccioni describes as the city on the ground. By contrast, urban livability is derived from subjective indicators, people's perceptions about aspects such as employment opportunities, fear of crime, and feelings about the quality of sports and education provision. It's a relative term, specific to the time, place, purpose, and values of the person making the assessment. It's based on the interaction between person and environment characteristics and is an internal feeling, what Paccioni describes as the city in the mind. Both the environmental quality of a city and its livability are important for determining the overall quality of life for the people living there. And the exact same thing is true for our code bases. Michael Feather's 2004 book, Working Effectively with Legacy Code, is now nearly 20 years old. And despite showing its age in some ways, in others it's still extremely relevant. Like here, where he's reminding us that code is our house and we have to live there. Livable code was the subject of a talk by software architect Sarah May a few years ago, in which she compared the code we write to the interior design of our houses. May argued that there exists a scale of livability. At one end, a hoarder's house, or a complete mess of a code base. And at the other end, a set-dressed, beautifully tidy house with space-saving furniture and everything put neatly away in its place. Or a completely abstracted code base. Being honest, I suspect it's likely that the majority of us at least would not prefer to live at either end of this scale. More likely, there will be an optimum level of livability for your own individual teams. And Sarah May concluded her talk with this: the most important part of software development is not the code or the people. It is the system. And it's this word that seems to keep coming up. Ellen Ullman compared computer systems with cities. Geographers study the city as a system. And now Sarah May concludes that the most important part of software development is the system. There must be something to this. Referring to my geography textbooks again, a system is defined as a group of elements such that each one is in some way interdependent, either directly or indirectly, with every other element. So, it's the interactions between the elements that creates the system. And when studying the city as a system, geographers have highlighted the importance of understanding the interaction between person and environment when it comes to determining the quality of life for the people living there. So, what can we learn from this approach when it comes to determining the quality of life for all of us living in our virtual environments, our code bases? Well, perhaps we can take a similar approach to that of urban geography. in thinking not only about the environmental quality of our code bases, but also their livability. There are tools aplenty out there to help us assess the environmental quality of our code bases. Analysis tools that will count the number of lines of code, analyze function complexity, static analysis tools, and code coverage metrics. These are objective and absolute indicators. Perhaps not quite the code on the ground, but maybe the code in the cloud? But of course, these numbers will paint only half the picture. To complete it, we also need to consider subjective information about the livability of our code bases from the people that live there, ourselves and our teams. How does every person on our team feel about the code base? What perceptions do they hold of different areas or aspects of it? What is the state of the code in the mind? Does this tally with our environmental quality metrics? If not, why not? When geographers are investigating urban environmental quality or livability within a city, they'll often refer to common lists of life concerns, things that we all care about on a day-to-day basis. Things like health, education, employment, housing, and so on. But what would a list of life concerns look like from the perspective of a developer living, as we do, in a code base? Well, our objective analysis tools will give us a bit of a head start in making a list, but there must be more that we can add. And being the geographer that I am, I of course created a questionnaire, well, Google form, to ask the team of engineers that I work with for their input on this. And as anyone who's ever studied geography will know, when assessing or analysing things, we always like to approach from the three perspectives of environmental, social, and economic. So without further ado, it's time to reveal the list of developer code-based life concerns that my very quick, very small sample survey produced. I started by asking about the environmental aspect. Now, for us, this is the code itself. So I asked, what about the code can make your life better when working with it? I'm sure you'll associate with some of these responses, and no doubt have others that you would also add. Consistency and simplicity are key themes here. Basically, anything that reduces the cognitive load and environmental stressors. Next, I asked about the social perspective. Now, for us, this is our teams. So I asked, what about your team can help make your life better when working with the code? Again, I'm sure there are things here that you'll associate with. Collaboration is a key theme here, as is trust and support. Next, I asked about the economic aspect. Now, for us, this is the business influence. So I asked, what about how a business operates can help make your life better when working with the code? Now, of course, working with the business is also about collaboration and trust. But also highlighted here, I think, are aspects of the business understanding of us in terms of what we're doing, and our understanding of the business in terms of a shared vision. Finally, I asked, what other aspects contribute to making your life better when working with code? I think a couple of things are worth pointing out here. First, tools and documentation are important when working with code. And secondly, that notion of challenge and experimentation, I believe, highlights the desire I suspect we all share for that intrinsic motivation, generated by autonomy, mastery, and purpose, that freedom to experiment, as written about by American author Daniel Pink in his book, Drive. Putting it all together then, and we start to have a list of developer code-based life concerns, things that contribute to our quality of life within our virtual environments. And one thing I think is worth highlighting straight away is how many of these things have nothing to do with the state of the code itself. And what we have here, I believe, is a wider picture, is a list of some of the key interactions between the elements in the system that is software development. So, what can we do with this list? Well, much like geographers may use a list of life concerns to investigate resident quality of life within a city or specific neighbourhood, so can we use this list of life concerns to investigate quality of life for developers living in their respective code bases. Results may tell us that there's a need to improve our onboarding service or process, or perhaps there's a need to improve the documentation of a specific feature set. Or maybe there's a need to educate the wider business on the importance of automating our processes. This insight will allow us to create personal goals, team agreements, and policies for our technical roadmap. Actionable strategies that we can implement to help improve our overall quality of life. When I started working on this talk, I was mainly concerned with identifying metaphors, similarities between city features and what we see in the code. But as I reconnected with that dormant geographer that lives within me, I realized that there are genuinely insights from the field of geography and its research methods that can help contribute to our understanding of ourselves and our interactions with our virtual environments. Geographic research continues to be of significance in real-world cities because of its ability to contribute to and influence future city policies that are implemented by urban planners. In this respect, urban planners are somewhat of our real-world counterparts. They hold a lot of responsibility when it comes to deciding how places develop. So I wondered whether there was any type of oath or mantra for urban planners. It's not official, but I found this and thought it was worth sharing because I believe it holds true for us too. Once again highlighting the parallels that exist between our worlds. It's quite poetic and more extensive than this, but pulls out the following 3 key points. I honour the wisdom of those who came before me. With humility I stand on which they have built. For me, this tallies with the retrospective Prime Directive. We truly believe that everyone did the best job they could with what they had at the time. I serve those who live here today. Their actions shape my actions. My vision must dance with theirs. I told you it was poetic. As developers, we serve our teams, and that team must share a vision, be that on approaches to ensuring quality of life, or with the business or sharing a shared vision with the wider business and product teams. We work for those who come tomorrow. May we deserve their admiration and inspire the best within them. We are but custodians of the code. Whilst we work on it, it's under our care. And it's our responsibility to ensure we do everything we can to achieve and maintain that quality of life that we strive for. Not just for ourselves and our teams today, but for our future selves and our future team members. And I hope this conference gives you the tools and inspiration to do just that. Just as all those rainy geography field trips allowed us the opportunity to explore the real world outside of the classroom, take this opportunity to be inspired, gain new insight, and make new connections. For you are currently on the largest dedicated PHP field trip in Europe. Thank you.